Earlier this month, the federal government released its annual report on the financial health of Social Security, and the headline number moved in the wrong direction again. The fund that pays retirement and survivor benefits is now projected to run low in late 2032, a full year earlier than what last year's report predicted. If you've seen headlines saying Social Security is running out or going bankrupt, I want to slow down and explain what that actually means, because the real mechanism here is very different from what those words usually imply, and understanding the difference matters for how you plan. I want to acknowledge something honestly before we go further. This is a genuinely confusing topic, partly because the underlying mechanics are complicated, and partly because a lot of media coverage compresses a nuanced financial projection into language designed to grab attention rather than explain anything clearly. Both things can be true at once. This is a real and serious issue worth understanding, and most of what you've heard about it probably oversimplified it into something scarier or vaguer than the actual report says. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly what this new report says, what actually happens at that 2032 date if nothing changes, why the date keeps moving earlier, and the realistic menu of options Congress has to prevent it. No alarmism, no false comfort either, just the real mechanics. If you're not subscribed yet, take a moment and do that now and turn on the bell. This exact report comes out every single year, and the headlines around it rarely explain what the numbers actually mean for your specific check. That's what this channel is for. Subscribe and let's get into it. Let's start with the single most important correction I can make today. Social Security is not described accurately by the phrase running out of money in the way people usually picture it, meaning a bank account hitting zero and payments simply stopping. That is not what happens, and it's never happened in the program's history. Here's what's actually being measured. Social Security has a trust fund, essentially a reserve built up over decades, that supplements the money coming in right now from payroll taxes. For years, the program has been paying out slightly more in benefits than it collects in payroll taxes in a given year, and it's been covering that gap using the trust fund's reserves. The depletion date being discussed in this new report is the point at which those reserves run out entirely. Here's the critical part almost every headline skips. Even after that reserve is fully drawn down, the program doesn't stop collecting payroll taxes. Workers are still paying in every single paycheck, and that ongoing tax revenue continues funding benefits, just without the cushion the reserve used to provide. According to this year's report, once the reserve specifically for retirement and survivor benefits is depleted, in the fourth quarter of 2032, the program would still be able to pay 78% of scheduled benefits using ongoing tax revenue alone. That's a real and serious benefit cut, 22%, but it is fundamentally different from the program disappearing or checks stopping entirely. Let's put that 22% into real dollars, because percentages alone don't tell you much. The average Social Security retirement benefit in 2026 is around $2,071 a month. A 22% cut on that average benefit works out to roughly $455 less every single month. For a married couple where both spouses are average earners, independent analysis puts the combined annual loss at somewhere around $10,600 a year. This is the scenario that would occur specifically if Congress takes no action at all between now and 2032, which is a real possibility worth taking seriously, but it is also a future, preventable outcome, not a locked-in certainty. Now, I want to address something else that gets confused constantly in coverage of this topic. Social Security actually has two separate trust funds, one for retirement and survivor benefits, called OASI, and a much smaller one for disability benefits, called DI. The 2032 depletion date I just described applies specifically to the OASI fund. The disability fund, on its own, is projected to remain fully funded for the entire 75-year period covered by this report, all the way through the year 2100. You'll also see a different number floating around 2034 with an 83% figure instead of 78. Here's what that represents. If Congress passed a law allowing the retirement fund and the disability fund to be combined into a single shared reserve, the combined depletion date would be 2034 instead of 2032, and the resulting cut would be 17% instead of 22%. I want to be precise about this because it's often presented as if it's already the plan. Combining these two funds currently requires an act of Congress. It is not something that happens automatically, and right now current law keeps them separate. The 2034 number represents a hypothetical, more favorable scenario that depends entirely on a policy change that hasn't been made. So why did the date move a full year earlier compared to last year's report? Two main factors are driving this shift. The first is demographic. The trustees lowered their assumption for the country's fertility rate and tightened their assumptions about future immigration levels. Both of these reduce the projected number of future workers paying into the system relative to the number of people collecting benefits. To put that ratio in perspective, back in 1960, there were about 5 workers paying in for every person collecting benefits. Today, that ratio has fallen to somewhere around 2.5 to 3 workers per beneficiary, and it's projected to keep declining in the coming decades. Fewer workers paying in relative to the number of people receiving checks puts direct pressure on the system's finances. The second factor is more recent and more specific. A tax law passed last year included provisions that reduced the income tax liability on Social Security benefits for many beneficiaries. While that may have felt like good news for individual taxpayers in the short term, it also reduced one of the revenue streams that flows back into the trust fund, since taxes collected on benefits are one of the ways the system funds itself. According to the trustees' analysis, this change alone reduced projected trust fund revenue by an estimated $169 billion, which is a meaningful contributor to why the depletion date moved up by a year. It's worth understanding why a shrinking worker-to-beneficiary ratio matters so directly to this calculation. Social Security is largely a pay-as-you-go system, meaning today's workers are funding today's retirees, not simply drawing down a personal account they individually paid into. When that ratio was 5-to-1, the system comfortably supported itself with room to spare, building up the very reserve we're discussing today. As that ratio compresses toward 2 or 2.5 workers per beneficiary, the same payroll tax rate simply generates less revenue relative to the number of checks that need to go out each month. This is a structural, demographic pressure that exists independently of any single piece of legislation, which is part of why this conversation keeps recurring year after year, regardless of which party controls Congress. I think it's worth stepping back and adding some historical context here, because this kind of warning is not new. Since the early 2010s, trustees' reports have projected a depletion date somewhere in the early to mid-2030s. The specific year has shifted around within that general window for over a decade now, sometimes moving slightly later, sometimes earlier, depending on the economy and policy changes in a given year. This isn't the first time the country has faced a depletion warning either. In the early 1980s, Social Security came dangerously close to being unable to pay benefits in full within mere months, not decades. Congress responded in 1983 with a set of reforms, including gradually raising the full retirement age, which is the exact phase-in I've covered in another video on this channel, increasing the payroll tax rate, and beginning to tax a portion of benefits for higher-income retirees for the first time. Those changes extended the program's solvency for decades. The point isn't that history guarantees the same outcome this time. It's that Congress has faced a version of this exact pressure before and has acted, even if often later than ideal. So what are the realistic options on the table right now for addressing this gap? I want to walk through these as even-handedly as I can, because reasonable people genuinely disagree about which combination makes the most sense. And this channel isn't here to tell you which one is correct. One option is raising or eliminating the cap on income subject to Social Security payroll taxes. Right now, in 2026, earnings above $184,500 aren't taxed for Social Security at all. Raising or removing that cap would mean higher earners pay Social Security tax on more or all of their income, generating more revenue without changing the tax rate itself. A second option is raising the payroll tax rate, currently 12.4%, split between employees and employers, a rate that hasn't changed in more than 4 decades. Even a modest increase, applied broadly, would bring in additional revenue, though it would mean a real cost increase for every working taxpayer, not just higher earners. A third option is further raising the full retirement age, beyond where the 1983 reforms eventually leveled it off at 67. This effectively reduces lifetime benefits for future retirees by shortening the number of years benefits are collected, without changing the per-month formula directly. A fourth option is reducing benefits specifically for higher-income retirees, while protecting or even increasing benefits for lower-income retirees, sometimes called means testing or benefit reduction by income tier. There are other variations and combinations of these ideas that come up in policy discussions, but these 4 represent the broad categories that most serious proposals draw from. Each comes with real trade-offs, and which mix Congress eventually chooses, if it acts at all, will significantly shape what retirement looks like for people who haven't claimed benefits yet, and to a lesser extent, for people who already have. Let me answer 2 more questions I know are on people's minds. Does this same report say anything about Medicare? Yes, a companion report on Medicare's Hospital Insurance Trust Fund was released at the same time, and it shows a similar pattern, a projected depletion date in 2033, also 1 quarter earlier than last year's projection, for similar underlying reasons. I'm not covering the Medicare details in depth in this video, but the same core principle applies there too. A depletion date is not the same as the program disappearing. And if you're already collecting benefits right now, should you be doing anything differently today because of this report? Based on the historical pattern, probably not, at least not in a panic sense. When Congress has acted on this kind of warning before, changes have generally been phased in over time and have tended to shield people already retired or very close to retirement from the most significant changes. That historical pattern isn't a guarantee about what a future Congress will do, but it's a reasonable basis for not making drastic, fear-driven decisions about your finances today based on a projection for an event 6 years away. So here's what I want you to actually take away from all of this, practically speaking. First, Social Security has never missed a scheduled payment in its history, and nothing in this report changes that fact for benefits being paid right now or in the near term. The 2032 date is 6 years away, and represents a projection under current law if nothing changes between now and then, not an announcement that checks are stopping. Second, keep an eye on actual legislation rather than headlines alone. If Congress passes any reform, whether it's adjusting the tax cap, the tax rate, the retirement age, or benefit formulas, that will meaningfully change these projections in either direction, and it's worth updating your understanding when real policy changes happen, rather than relying on a single year's projection indefinitely. Third, if you're several years or more away from claiming benefits, this is a reasonable moment to build some flexibility into your broader retirement plan. Not by assuming the worst, but by not relying on Social Security covering 100% of your needs if you have the ability to diversify your income sources elsewhere. This is sound retirement planning, regardless of what happens with this specific trust fund question. Fourth, if you're currently receiving benefits or claiming very soon, understand that any changes Congress has historically made tend to be phased in gradually and tend to protect people already at or near retirement age, similar to how the 1983 reforms were structured. That's not a guarantee about future legislation, but it is the historical pattern worth knowing. Here's the honest, full picture, one more time. The Retirement and Survivor Benefit Trust Fund is now projected to be depleted in the 4th quarter of 2032, a year earlier than last year's projection, due to demographic shifts and a recent tax law change that reduced revenue flowing into the fund. If nothing changes by then, the program would still pay 78% of scheduled benefits using ongoing payroll tax revenue, not 0%. Congress has a range of realistic tools available to prevent that cut entirely, The same kinds of tools used in 1983, the last time this kind of warning became urgent. Whether they use those tools and which combination they choose remains an open political question, not a settled outcome. I'll keep tracking this report every year it's released, the same way I track the COLA announcement every fall, and I'll let you know directly if the projected date or percentage meaningfully changes, or if Congress actually moves on legislation. That's a far more useful habit than reacting to whichever headline happens to use the scariest possible wording in a given year. If you know someone who's seen a scary headline about Social Security running out and hasn't seen the full picture, send them this video. The real story here is serious, but it's also a lot more specific and a lot less hopeless than a 5-word headline can capture. That's what this channel is here for. I'll see you in the next one.